You know that feeling when you're trying to learn something new and it feels like there's a wall you just can't break through? Well, what if I told you there's a method designed to just dissolve that wall? But it involves creating one of the absolute weirdest learning environments you can possibly imagine. Okay, let's get into this.
So, picture this. You sign up for a language course. You walk in on the first day, you're expecting, desks, a whiteboard, the usual, but the room you step into is, well, it's definitely not a classroom.
Instead of those hard plastic desks, you see these comfy, plush armchairs. There's soft, classical music playing in the background, and the walls, they're covered with art, but also posters that have grammar rules just sort of hanging out on them. Then, the very first thing the teacher does is tell you to pick a brand new name and a whole new identity for the class.
Right away, you're probably thinking, wait, did I sign up for a language class or a day spa? I mean, how could this possibly be an effective way to learn anything? It just seems way too relaxed, too weird, maybe too easy.
Well, this whole bizarre scene is actually a very specific, highly structured, and pretty controversial teaching method. Let's break down what is actually going on here. What you've just stepped into is a Desuggestopedia classroom. It was created back in the 1970s by a Bulgarian psychiatrist named Georgy Lozanov. And it was all born from this really radical idea that maybe traditional school doesn't just teach us things, maybe it also teaches us what our limits are.
So here's the core theory. We all have this huge, vast potential to learn, but it gets locked away behind all these negative suggestions we've absorbed over the years. The fear of getting an answer wrong, the stress of a test, that feeling that you're just not a math person. The whole point of Desuggestopedia is to desuggest those mental blocks.
So, okay, how on earth does a comfy chair and a fake name actually unlock your brain's potential? Well, it's all about tricking that conscious, critical, and frankly, anxious part of your mind.
And this is where the philosophy is just totally different. See, traditional learning is all about conscious effort. You focus, you grind, and that can create a lot of stress. Desuggestopedia, on the other hand, wants to tap into what Lozanov called the paraconscious mind, basically a state of relaxed awareness where you can soak up information without even feeling like you're trying. And this gets to a key principle called peripheral learning. Lozanov believed we're always, constantly absorbing info from our environment. Those grammar posters on the wall, you're not supposed to study them, you just kind of absorb them. The calm music, the teacher's confident tone, it all sends these little messages to your brain that, hey, learning is safe, it's easy, it's actually enjoyable.
Now, while the whole vibe feels super spontaneous and relaxed, the actual teaching technique is anything but. A lesson follows this very specific three-part ritual. First up, you've got the receptive phase. This is where you go over old stuff, but through fun games, not stressful drills. Then comes the real heart of the method, the concert session, where new information gets introduced. And finally, there's the activation phase, where you get to use what you just learned in really creative ways, like singing or acting out little scenes.
Now, this concert session, this is the part everyone talks about. In the first active concert, the teacher reads new material really dramatically. Their voice actually follows the rhythm and emotion of a powerful piece of classical music. Then, for the second passive concert, you just lean back, close your eyes, and listen as they read it all again, but this time in a calm voice, set to really serene Baroque music. The idea is to just let the words wash over you.
And right there, that's the central paradox, isn't it? For all its focus on effortless learning and relaxation, everything is meticulously planned. The exact music choice, the teacher's tone of voice, the art on the walls, it's all one big, carefully orchestrated performance designed to get your mind into that perfect state for learning.
Okay, but for any of this to actually work, the relationship between the teacher and the student has to be totally different from what we're used to. Let's look at what that means. Here's the really crucial part of the dynamic. The teacher has to be this figure of absolute but benevolent authority. They have to project total confidence, not in themselves, but in you, the student, and your ability to learn. And in return, you, the student, are encouraged to enter this almost childlike state of trust and openness. Some critics call it infantilization, where you just let go of your adult skepticism and completely trust the process.
And that's why you get a new identity. If you're Pierre, the famous artist from Paris, you aren't held back by the baggage of, regular you who always struggled in French class. This new persona is like psychological armor. It gives you the freedom to play around, make mistakes, and learn without that constant fear of being judged.
So, I know what you're thinking. This all sounds fascinating, but it also sounds kind of out there, right? So we have to ask the big question. Does any of this actually work? What are the results?
Let's start with the one claim that's so unbelievable it put this entire method on the map.
25 times. That wasn't a typo. That's the advantage Georgy Lazanov himself claimed. He said that students using Desuggestopedia could learn hundreds, sometimes over 1,000, new vocabulary words in a single day. I mean, a learning rate like that would be an absolute game changer, if it's true.
But a claim that big needs some serious, extraordinary proof. So what happened when other researchers tried to see if they could get the same incredible results? Yeah, well, the wider academic community was, and still is, pretty skeptical. A lot of linguists have flat out called it a pseudoscience, because you can't really measure things like a paraconscious mind. The biggest knock against it is that other researchers just couldn't replicate those amazing results. Critics argue that any success probably comes down to two big things: a really powerful placebo effect, where you learn more just because you believe you're in a superprogram, and the incredible charisma and authority of the teacher.
But hold on. Whether Desuggestopedia is a miracle or just a mirage, maybe its so-called failure as a science actually reveals something way more powerful about how we all learn. Because you don't need a 3-part musical concerto to use its main ideas. The biggest takeaway here is that our mindset might be the most important learning tool we have. Think about it. We can all create a study space that's more relaxing. We can change our self-talk from "I'm so bad at this" to "I'm figuring this out." Just putting up notes where you see them every day, that's peripheral learning. The core lesson is that just actively trying to lower your own anxiety is one of the best learning hacks there is.
And that really brings us to the final, big idea. Desuggestopedia makes us ask this really powerful question: what if the placebo effect, the power of pure belief, isn't a flaw in the method, but actually the entire point? What if those limits you think you have, the stories you tell yourself about being bad at math or not a language person, are just suggestions you've accepted as true? What if the biggest barrier to your own learning isn't your brain, but your beliefs?